Picture this. Clarence House, early 1990s. One of the most beloved women in Britain is hosting lunch. Guests arrive, greeted by impeccable service, fine champagne, and the warm, twinkling presence of the Queen Mother herself. In her 90s, but still radiating that legendary charm. Plates appear as if by magic. Glasses refill themselves, and not a single servant crosses anyone's eyeline. Because they can't. For 51 years, the staff at Clarence House operated in what can only be described as perma-stealth mode. Hidden back corridors, secret staircases, strict protocols dictating that if, God forbid, a servant encountered a guest in the main house, they were expected to turn aside, avert their eyes, or literally face the wall until the superior person passed. The year is 1994. The Berlin Wall fell 5 years ago. The internet is becoming a thing. Britpop is happening. Friends just premiered on television. And inside this Georgian mansion, just steps from Buckingham Palace, the rules of service haven't meaningfully changed since King Edward VII was demanding his footmen disappear into the wallpaper, nearly a century earlier. This wasn't some Victorian period drama. This was real life, running parallel to mobile phones and Princess Diana doing her explosive BBC interview. And the woman enforcing it all? Britain's sweet granny, the nation's most beloved grandmother, the twinkling presence everyone adored. The photographer Cecil Beaton nailed it in the 1950s. He called her a marshmallow made on a welding machine. Soft and sweet on the outside, forged from something considerably harder within. So here's the question nobody in mainstream coverage ever really asks. How does someone maintain Edwardian servant protocols into the age of the Spice Girls? And what else were they maintaining that we didn't see? Let's talk about it. To understand the Queen Mother's ghost house, you first need to understand what these invisible servant rules actually were. Because to modernize, it sounds made up, like something from a satirical novel about class anxiety taken to absurd extremes. It wasn't satire. It was standard practice. The height of this system was the Victorian and Edwardian eras, roughly 1837 to 1914. Britain's grand houses were explicitly designed with two parallel circulation systems existing side by side. Think of it like the Upside Down from Stranger Things, except instead of monsters, it's full of exhausted humans carrying trays and polishing silver. The main corridors and staircases served family and guests. These were the beautiful spaces, the ornate railings, the impressive hallways, the rooms you'd see in period dramas. A shadow network of service passages, back stairs, and hidden doors allowed servants to move through the building without ever being seen. Narrower, darker, no decorative moldings here. The ideology behind it mixed practical considerations with pure class anxiety. Sure, servants moving through the house shouldn't disrupt formal events. But more than that, the people doing all the actual work should remain invisible reminders of the labor that made aristocratic life possible. Present in effect, absent in person. You could enjoy your champagne without being troubled by the face of the person who poured it. The rules were dehumanizing by design. Servants rose before the family and retired after them, keeping their working hours invisible. If a servant encountered a family member or guest in the main part of the house, they were expected to stop, step aside, avert their eyes. Some accounts describe them turning to face the wall until the superior person passed. Speaking, unless spoken to, was forbidden. You existed to serve, not to be acknowledged. You were a function, not a person. And the architecture itself enforced this system. Hidden doors disguised as part of the wall paneling. Service stairs tucked behind unassuming doors. Entire corridors that guests never knew existed. The physical structure of these houses was built to render human beings invisible. World War I dealt this system its first major blow. Young men who would have become footmen were killed in the trenches. Those who survived often refused to return to service. Why would you? You'd seen the world. You'd fought and bled and watched your friends die. Coming back to turn your face to the wall because Lord whoever was walking down the corridor? That wasn't happening. Young women discovered they could earn better wages with more dignity in factories. The supply of domestic servants dropped dramatically and never recovered. World War II finished the job. By 1945, the entire social structure that had produced the invisible servant class was fundamentally changed. Britain was building a welfare state, not a servant state. Houses that retained staff generally did so with relaxed protocols. Servants became help or staff, more visible, better paid, treated with something approaching human dignity. By the 1960s and 1970s, even among the aristocracy, maintaining full Edwardian servant invisibility was essentially impossible. Most people saw it as absurd, a relic of a world that had died in the mud of the Somme. And then there was Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Born in 1900, directly into this vanishing world, she absorbed its rules as natural law, the way the sun rises, the way water flows downhill, the way servants should be invisible, and she never let them go. Elizabeth Angela Marguerite Bowes-Lyon was born on August 4, 1900, the ninth of 10 children born to Claude Bowes-Lyon, Lord Glamis, and his wife Cecilia. The family had Glamis Castle in Scotland, one of the most atmospheric ancestral homes in the country, and a lifestyle that embodied every Edwardian convention at its peak. Young Elizabeth grew up surrounded by servants who knew their place, which was to say, out of sight unless summoned. The back passages, the averted eyes, the careful choreography of invisibility, all of this was simply how houses worked, as natural and unremarkable as running water. This is the thing about being raised in privilege. You don't notice the systems that maintain it. You just exist inside them, absorbing their rules as the way things are, the way things should be, the way things have always been. Her education was exactly what you'd expect for an aristocratic daughter of that era. Languages, music, art, deportment. No systematic training in anything practical. The Bowes-Lyon girls were being prepared for marriage into families like their own, where they would preside over similar households with similar invisible servants moving through similar hidden passages. There was no expectation that the girls would need professional skills or rigorous academic training. Why would they? They were going to be wives, decorative, charming, accomplished in the arts of entertaining and being entertaining. This education, or lack of it, would echo through Elizabeth's life. She later admitted that she hadn't prioritized education for her own daughters, recognizing in hindsight that more rigorous preparation would have served them better. Her daughter Elizabeth would become Queen of the British Empire. And still, the Queen Mother had thought languages and deportment were sufficient preparation for ruling a quarter of the world's population. That recognition came decades after the damage was done, and it didn't change her fundamental worldview. She had been raised to value form over function, tradition over adaptation, gracious performance over practical preparation. These values, absorbed in childhood at Glamis Castle, would prove remarkably durable. 70 years durable, 90 years durable, right up until her death at 101. She married Albert, Duke of York, on April 26, 1923, after reportedly turning him down twice. Albert was shy, stammering, painfully uncertain of himself. Elizabeth was charming, confident, socially adept. Their marriage was by all accounts genuine, but it was also complementary in a specific way. She provided the steel he lacked, and the institution of marriage provided her with the stage she was born to command. The newlyweds established their household at 145 Piccadilly in London, where Elizabeth immediately began running things according to her Edwardian standards. Staff were expected to maintain the protocols she had learned at Glams: invisible movement, silent service, rigid hierarchy. In the 1920s, this wasn't yet anachronistic. Many aristocratic households still operated this way, though the world was changing fast around them. But Elizabeth wasn't changing with it. She was holding the line. Their daughters, Princess Elizabeth, born in 1926, Princess Margaret Rose in 1930, were raised in this environment. Educated almost entirely at home by governesses, most famously Marion Crawford. The curriculum was that of well-bred young ladies: languages, history, art, music, deportment. No systematic education in constitutional law, no economics, no politics, no understanding of how government actually works. Even after December 11, 1936, when King Edward VIII signed the instrument of abdication to Mary Wallis Simpson, even after 10-year-old Princess Elizabeth became heir presumptive to the throne of the British Empire, her education stayed basically the same. The new Queen Consort never forgave Edward or Wallis for this unwanted promotion. Her husband was forced onto a throne he dreaded. His health would be destroyed by the stress of kingship, and Elizabeth would spend the rest of her life blaming that woman for everything that followed. 7 decades. That's how long she held that grudge, until her death in 2002. 70 years of cold, unwavering antipathy that revealed the welding machine beneath the marshmallow. She could hold a position, whether against a person or against the changing times, with absolute tenacity. That's the thing about the Queen Mother that the beloved granny narrative always obscures. Once she decided something was how things should be, she did not change her mind. Not for decades. Not ever. Not about Wallis Simpson, not about her servants, not about anything. Now here's where it gets dark, like genuinely uncomfortable. Because the pattern of making inconvenient people invisible didn't start with servants. It started with family. The same year German bombs were falling on London, something considerably worse was happening in the Bowes-Lyon family. In 1941, Nerissa and Catherine, daughters of the Queen's brother John Herbert Bowes-Lyon and his wife Fenella, were committed to Royal Earlswood Hospital, a mental institution in Surrey. Nerissa was 22, Catherine was 15, a child. Both sisters had been born with severe learning disabilities, what the brutal medical language of the time called mental deficiency or imbecility. For the first years of their lives, they had lived with their family, but in 1941, the decision was made to institutionalize them permanently. The stated reason was that institutions could provide better care than could be managed at home. The actual effect was to remove 2 embarrassing relatives from sight and memory. Out of sight, out of mind. Hidden away where they couldn't trouble anyone, where polite society wouldn't have to acknowledge their existence. What happened next transformed this from a sad story into a scandal waiting to erupt. Burke's Peerage, the authoritative guide to British aristocratic families, began listing both women as having died. Nerissa in 1940, Catherine in 1961. These dates were completely false. Both women were very much alive, living in Royal Earlswood, receiving no visits from their royal relatives, gradually forgotten by the outside world. They had been erased from the family record, declared dead while still breathing. Think about that for a moment. 2 living women, locked in an institution, while the official family records declared them dead. Their own family recorded their deaths while they were still alive. The Queen, first as Queen Consort, later as Queen Mother, had decades to correct these records, decades to visit her nieces, decades to ensure they wouldn't be forgotten. She did none of these things. The pattern of making inconvenient people invisible, which she would enforce so meticulously with her servants, had been applied to her own family members with even more thoroughness. At least the servants were acknowledged to exist. Nerissa died in 1986, 45 years after being institutionalized. She was buried in a pauper's grave at Red Hill Cemetery, marked only with a plastic tag and a serial number. No family member attended her funeral. No flowers from Clarence House. No acknowledgement from the Queen Mother. No marker bearing her name. Just a plastic tag. Serial number. That's how a member of the royal family was buried. For 46 years, these women existed in institutional limbo. Then, in 1987, journalists discovered the truth. The revelation that the Queen Mother had nieces, first cousins of Queen Elizabeth II, hidden away and falsely declared dead, caused a furor that briefly cracked the carefully maintained image. Burke's peerage entries were corrected. The Queen Mother's office issued careful statements distancing her from the decisions. Defenders argued she may not have been closely involved in the institutionalization. That was the parents' choice. And that the false death records may have been created without her knowledge. But here's the thing. She had decades to correct the record, decades to visit, decades to ensure her nieces weren't buried in unmarked graves. She did none of it. And then the investigation revealed something worse. Nerissa and Catherine weren't the only hidden relatives. 3 more Bowes Lyon cousins, Edenia, Rosemary, and Etheldreda, Catherine's sisters, had also been institutionalized and erased from Burke's peerage with false death dates. 5 women. 5 living women declared dead by their own family. This wasn't a single tragic decision. This was a systematic family approach to dealing with disability. Make it invisible. After the exposure, the royal family resumed contact with Catherine. Princess Anne visited her in later years, but the question lingered. Would any of this acknowledgement have happened without journalists forcing the issue? The scandal faded from headlines. Scandals do. But it left a stain on the marshmallow image that would never quite wash out for those who remembered. So let's talk about Clarence House, because this is where the Queen Mother built her kingdom within a kingdom, a place where the rules of 1900 could live forever. King George VI died on February 6, 1952, at age 56. His health had been broken by the strain of wartime leadership and a role he never wanted. Elizabeth was 51, suddenly widowed, faced with an identity crisis. She was no longer queen consort. Her daughter had that title now. She was no longer needed at Buckingham Palace. The institution that had given her purpose for 16 years had moved on without her. What does someone with her personality do with that displacement? Someone who cannot bear to be peripheral, someone who needs to control her environment absolutely? She builds her own palace. The solution was Clarence House, the Nash-designed mansion on the Mall that had been home to various royals since its construction between 1825 and 1827. She moved in during 1953 and immediately set about creating a world entirely under her control. A pocket dimension where the 1950s never quite ended, where the champagne never stopped flowing, where the servants remained as invisible as they had been in her childhood at Glamis Castle. Clarence House was architecturally perfect for her purposes. Like most grand houses of its Georgian era, it had been designed with the assumption that servants were a necessary presence but an undesirable sight. Grand public rooms on the main floors, a network of narrower corridors, back staircases, and service passages threading through the building like a second shadow house. These back stairs routes allowed staff to move between floors, carry trays, deliver messages, and perform the 1,000 small tasks of running a household without ever crossing paths with family or guests in the main corridors. Unlike most other grand houses, which had converted these service passages to other uses, or simply stopped enforcing the old protocols, Clarence House, under the Queen Mother, maintained the full Edwardian system. Staff were expected to use the back passages and service stairs whenever possible. They were not to be seen by guests. If, by some accident of timing, a servant found themselves in the same corridor as a guest or family member, the protocol was to turn aside, allow the superior person to pass without acknowledgement, or face the wall if necessary. This wasn't preference. It was enforced expectation, part of the culture that new staff learned quickly if they wanted to keep their jobs. Among the staff who learned these rules early was a 15-year-old boy who arrived in 1951, initially serving the then Princess Elizabeth before the household reshuffled. His name was William John Stevenson Talon. When Elizabeth became queen and moved to Buckingham Palace, Talon transferred to the Queen Mother's household. He was assigned to work the back passages, the hidden corridors and service stairs that let servants move unseen through the building. It was a position that would define his entire life, over 50 years in the Shadow House. Talon rose through the ranks over the following decades, eventually becoming Page of the Backstairs, a title that sounds medieval because it essentially is, and the de facto manager of her domestic shadow world. His nickname, Backstairs Billy, came directly from these hidden roots. He was the master of the ghost passages, the steward who ruled the Shadow House while the Queen Mother presided over the Gilded One. The relationship between them grew remarkably intimate by royal standards. He became her confidant, her drinking companion, the gatekeeper to her private world. As close to genuine friendship as the unbridgeable gulf between mistress and staff would allow. By the 1990s, when the Queen Mother was in her 90s and increasingly frail, Talon controlled access to her with iron determination. He decided who saw her. He managed the flow of visitors. He protected her world, their world, from outside intrusion. This was a man who had spent half a century navigating those back passages, who had built his entire identity around the Shadow House system, who had risen from a 15-year-old boy to the most powerful servant in the Queen Mother's household. And still, he spent over 50 years navigating those back passages, still turning aside when guests appeared, still maintaining the invisibility protocols that the rest of Britain had abandoned in their grandparents' time. The system never changed, because she never changed, and the people who served her had to accept that or leave. This lifestyle required money, enormous amounts of it. The staff establishment at Clarence House was large. Estimates suggest around 50 people in various capacities: housekeepers, cooks, footmen, gardeners, drivers, pages, maids. An entire small economy of human beings dedicated to maintaining one woman's world exactly as she wanted it. Maintaining the house, the gardens, the entertaining at her level required serious cash flow. She owned racehorses and was a devoted follower of national hunt racing, an expensive hobby by any measure. The champagne bill alone would have bankrupted most households. Her daily routine reportedly included a gin and dubonnet before lunch, a ritual that became famous, wine with lunch, an afternoon pick-me-up, and champagne in the evening. Veuve Clicquot and Krug were the house favorites. Visitors described the atmosphere as perpetually lubricated, a flowing river of bubbles that never seemed to run dry. Through all of it, the Queen Mother spent freely, confident that the money would somehow be there. Coutts, the Queen's bankers since 1692, extended credit year after year. They apparently viewed the Queen Mother's account as a prestige relationship worth maintaining, regardless of the mounting red ink. She was, after all, going to die eventually, and the estate would settle up. When she did die on March 30th, 2002, at the age of 101, the bills came due. Reports indicated she had accumulated an overdraft of around £4 million with Coutts, massive debt that had been rolling over for years. And yet, her estate was valued at approximately £70 million. So it wasn't that she couldn't pay her bills. She simply didn't. The debts were quietly settled from the estate after her death, swept away like everything else that might tarnish the image. This is the part that makes the psychological pattern clear. She wasn't poor. She had 70 million pounds, but she refused to see the debt, refused to acknowledge it, refused to deal with it, just like she refused to see her nieces in their institution, just like she refused to see her servants as anything other than invisible functions, just like she refused to see that the world had changed around her. The Queen Mother's fundamental approach to unpleasantness was to simply not see it. If she didn't acknowledge a problem, it didn't exist. If she didn't look at a person, they weren't there. If she didn't open the bank statements, the debt wasn't real. Her teeth told their own story of this privileged stubbornness. Despite access to the best medical care in the world, the Queen Mother's dental health was reportedly poor because she was famously terrified of dentists. One account states plainly that it was not a question of money when it came to her avoiding dental care. She simply couldn't bear it. She could have had any treatment at any time, performed by the most skilled practitioners in Britain, with the finest anesthesia and aftercare imaginable. She was just scared. And she let that fear override her dental health for decades. This small stubbornness mirrored the larger ones. The servant protocols she wouldn't update, the relatives she wouldn't acknowledge, the debts she wouldn't address, the grudge she wouldn't release. She decided how things would be, and that was that. Whether it was rational, whether it was kind, whether it was sustainable, whether it caused suffering to others, none of that mattered. She had decided. Through the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, while Britain transformed around her, Clarence House remained suspended in amber. The Beatles emerged. Inside Clarence House, servants turned to face the wall. Britain joined the European Economic Community. The back passages remained fully operational. Punk rock exploded. The champagne kept flowing. Margaret Thatcher rose and fell. The protocols didn't change. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989. Inside Clarence House, servants were still expected to remain invisible. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Her rules didn't. Princess Diana gave her explosive BBC interview in 1995, airing the royal family's dirty laundry on international television, talking about bulimia and infidelity and the pressures of royal life. At Clarence House, the staff still moved through hidden corridors, invisible to guests, maintaining rules that the rest of Britain had abandoned in their grandparents' time. The first websites launched, email became common, mobile phones spread everywhere. The Queen Mother's household operated as it had in 1953, as it had in 1923, as it had in 1900. 51 years, from 1947 to 1998. That's how long she enforced these Edwardian ghost protocols. Through the entire second half of the 20th century, through social revolutions and technological revolutions and cultural revolutions, none of it touched Clarence House. None of it touched her. What does it mean to maintain a system designed to make human beings invisible? Not for a few years during a transition period, not as a quirky preference that gradually softened, but for half a century with full enforcement long after everyone else had moved on. The Queen Mother had 5 decades to reconsider these protocols, 5 decades to notice that the world had changed, 5 decades to extend basic acknowledgement to the people who served her daily. She didn't. And here's the thing that connects all of it. The servants, the nieces, the debt, the grudge against Wallis Simpson, the dentist appointments she refused to attend, the education she didn't provide her daughters. It's all the same pattern. Once she decided how things would be, she did not change her mind. And if reality conflicted with her decision, she simply refused to see reality. Her nieces were inconvenient? Make them invisible. Declare them dead in the official records. Never visit. Her servants were servants? Make them invisible too. Maintain the back passages. Enforce the protocols. Don't acknowledge their existence in front of guests. Her debt was mounting? Don't acknowledge that either. The bank will sort it out eventually. Her teeth hurt? Better not to think about it. Wallis Simpson ruined her life? Never forgive her. Not for 70 years. Not ever. This is the psychology of someone who cannot adapt, who cannot accept that the world changes and people change, and sometimes you have to change with them. The marshmallow exterior, the charm, the warmth, the twinkling presence, that was real. The people who met her found her genuinely delightful. She could be funny and gracious and utterly captivating, but the welding machine was real too. Cold, hard, inflexible steel beneath the surface. Once she decided how things would be, whether servant protocols from her childhood, or the erasure of disabled relatives, or a 7-decade grudge against a divorced American, nothing moved her. Not changing times, not basic decency, not the plain evidence that the world had moved on. Cecil Beaton saw it clearly back in the 1950s. A marshmallow made on a welding machine. He photographed royalty for decades. He knew how to read people, and he saw what the public didn't see, that the sweetness was real, but so was the steel. The soft, sweet, beloved grandmother Britain adored? Genuine. The charm was not an act. The warmth, for those she chose to shine it upon, was apparently quite lovely. But for 51 years, she maintained a ghost house, made her servants into phantoms navigating hidden passages, let her nieces disappear into institutions and false death records, accumulated £4 million in debt while sitting on a £70 million fortune, held a grudge for 7 decades because her brother-in-law fell in love with the wrong woman. And when she died at 101, Britain mourned its beloved Queen Mum. The sweet grandmother, the national treasure, the last link to a gracious age. Very few mentioned the welding machine. Very few talked about the servants turning to face walls in 1994 because the Queen Mother walked past. Very few remembered Nerissa, buried with a plastic tag in 1986. Very few noted the £4 million in debt from someone worth $70 million. The marshmallow was so sweet that most people never tasted the steel, but it was always there, beneath the twinkling eyes and the legendary charm and the flowing champagne, beneath 50 years of hospitality at Clarence House, beneath the carefully maintained image of Britain's grandmother. Steel doesn't soften with age, it just gets better at hiding. And the Queen Mother hid it better than almost anyone in British history. For a century, right up until the end. That's the real story, not the beloved grandmother, not the national treasure. The woman who made human beings invisible, whether servants or nieces or inconvenient truths, and never once questioned whether she should. Subscribe for more stories like this.